Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. I hope you're doing well. And Death Grips, Sacramento experimental industrial hip-hop trio. It's been 10 years now since the release of their groundbreaking, game-changing mixtape, Exmilitary. It's really weird to think it's been 10 years. Not just because of the length of their career, but the length of this, that you're watching right now. It's kind of weird and surreal because this record over the years has not only become one of my personal musical favorites, but because of the way reviewing Death Grips has impacted me, my brand, my channel, I can't help but listen to this project and not also get nostalgic for like personal reasons around it, because there's so many things about my life, my apartment, my significant other, a lot of things that I just remember about back then. So this project means a lot to me. In a lot of different ways. It's a tape that my mind was blown by when I first reviewed it, and it's a tape that when I listen to it today, it still sounds fresh. It still sounds groundbreaking. It still sounds hard-hitting. This thing so many years later still is a beast, still is a monster, still does not let up, still kind of, in a lot of ways, sets a bar of extremity for anybody in industrial or experimental hip-hop. And look, that's not to say that everybody that came after Death Grips is a Death Grips ripoff and industrial hip-hop has to sound a certain way, so on and so forth. Those opinions annoy me quite a bit because there has been like a lot of great experimental hip-hop that's come out in the wake of Death Grips that isn't necessarily directly Death Grips inspired, but what I find amazing about this project is the way that it really just kind of set a tone for what rules we should be trying to break here, what envelopes we should be trying to push. Of course, the other groups that operate in similar lanes, groups and artists that operate in similar lanes over the years but do it differently, I mean, they're on their own thing. They're playing the game in their own way, but it's hard to think of whether or not there would be an audience for a lot of that stuff if it wasn't for the seed that this project planted. And look, when I talk about records and artists being influential, it's not merely in the sense that, artists X, Y, and Z heard this project and decided, I'm going to do that too. No, it also kind of comes in the form of warming up the audience to certain ideas, softening them to certain concepts. Because, look, at the end of the day, a lot of enjoyment when it comes to music and acceptance of what is music, what's not, what's listenable, what's not, is all dependent on familiarity. And the fact that Death Grips was able to come in with this project, this tape, this free tape out of nowhere, and rock this genre, not just hip-hop in general, but industrial hip-hop, which has been around a while. They're not the first industrial hip-hop group, not by a long shot. This project and the Money Store that came shortly after it are like not even close to being the first two projects in this genre, but damn if they're not the most relevant projects in the genre and most likely will be for years and years and years to come. And it's funny how many aspects of this record and Death Grip sound, conceptually anyway, in the abstract anyway, have become acceptable and just okay in the mainstream of hip-hop in the wake of this mixtape release. Case in point, when this dropped, there were so many responses and so many negative reactions to the aggression of it, the screaming. It's not hip-hop. It's not hip-hop. So many people cried. So many people screamed. This is not hip-hop. In what realm is what we're hearing here hip-hop? But it is in fact hip-hop. And the aggressive instrumentals and the screaming, the yelling. How many artists would go viral for doing exactly that on SoundCloud only so many years later? Whether or not Death Grips had any connection or influence on any of that is obviously up for debate. But the fact that they were ahead of the curve on it certainly says something. And the fact that so many iconic moments on this tape have become just items of internet lore, whether you're talking about the insanely heavy bass rumbling beat of Tachyon, or the Charles Manson samples on the front end of the track Beware. And when you're talking about music whose appeal is at least based in part in extremity, you do kind of run a risk in reaching a point where the envelope that you've pushed becomes just the accepted norm, and what you're doing no longer sounds extreme and it sounds normal now. It's just, you know, the way that things are, and you're no longer at the cutting edge of that extremity. But I can't say 10 years later that that is the case with Exmilitary, because so many of Ride's vocal performances here still have bite. The instrumentals still have punch. I mean, frickin' Lord of the Game sounds like a totally insane, flipped on its head take on a great jittery, glitchy MIA song. And that weird faux foreign groove that the band indulged in on Through the Walls. Honestly, I wish that's something they tried a little bit more on their later releases. You know, that's kind of another funny thing about Exmilitary. There are some very raw and nutty ideas that worked really well on here, because there's not a single track on here I don't enjoy to some degree that worked really well on here, but it's not something the band continued to indulge in as they dropped more releases, which is also what makes Exmilitary such a unique project in their discography, because as much as people reacted to this as not really being hip hop, this is arguably like the most hip-hop inspired project that they ever dropped, because Lord, the sampling, the reference points, the grooves, and how they kind of reference back to a lot of hardcore shit from the 90s. I mean, after this, the band's sound became way more influenced by electronic music and industrial music in general, digital hardcore too. Obviously, hip-hop continued to stay an influence on the Money Store and No Love Deep Web, and even deeper into the trio's discography. But damn if Culture Shock isn't one of the smoothest and coolest hip-hop cuts in the trio's whole discography. And to begin wrapping up things here, damn if this project wasn't, at least for those who were paying attention, who were hip to whatever was really going to be setting the tone for the next 10 years, damn if this project was not like a reset of some sort, because it really truly was, alongside a lot of other things that were happening in terms of like the of hip hop and internet culture in the early 2010s. Now, I say all of this a little disheartened because at this point, following Death Grips as closely as I have for as long as I have, I really feel like right now they may be done. In a way, I feel like that would be okay, because they had an incredible run, an incredible decade-long run with just one project after another, just a truly prolific decade. And, you know, maybe they will come back, maybe they will convene at some point. If they were ever to come back with another record, I feel like we would be dealing with a different era at that point. Like the 2010s was, I think, a particular era for Death Grips, now that it's over and done with, and the more space they're giving us between now and their last record, I feel like the more I'm able to really just like kind of digest it and observe all of it for what it was. And really not just the sonic and aesthetic splash that it created within internet music and hip hop, but also the way that like philosophically and narratively they were ahead of the curve in really displaying the horrific digital dystopia that was going to be set upon us. There was something like really explosive and exciting about that information age apocalypse that I think they portrayed in their music. But like, Lord, did it truly end up being as ugly as they were showing it to be in the earlier part of the decade. So I don't know, you know, those are my thoughts on this tape, the early portion of Death Grip's career. And look, I think every generation you only get a few artists that are just like, not only so on the nose in terms of what is necessary for the present, but again, just like so predictive of what's to come down the pipe sonically, and at least in the case of Death Grips, a little bit socially as well. So yes, those are my thoughts on this mixtape 10 years later. Still loving it. And I think it still has a lot of young minds to blow at this point, because I still run across kids today, even on the TikTok platform, who are just like hearing Death Grips for the first time and they're amazed by it. And they should be, because again, I think this project is still fresh to this day. And if you haven't heard it yet, please do. Over here next to my head, it's another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Death Grips, forever.